Hey, MOMnation. Welcome to Mental Wealth with Laura Wood and Katie Holly Lambert, where we talk through generational trauma so we can leave a new legacy for our children. Counselor Laura is with Benevieri Counseling out of Chandler, Arizona, and you can find her on Facebook, on the web, or by the link in the show notes. We hope you enjoy the show. Well, hello, MOMnation. It is Laura and I, and we are back with another. I can't even talk today. We can't do technology. We can't talk. We're doing real good today, Laura.
Tough shape. Yeah.
But we're here.
We sure are. Our
That's
presence is your present.
Exactly. As we are every month to do my very favorite thing, and that is work on ourselves. I mean, that's the reason for the name Mental Wealth, because we want to work on ourselves so that we can pass down a better legacy to our kiddos. And this legacy doesn't, it's not a financial legacy that we're talking about here. It's what's between the ears, which I think is the most important.
Yeah, the wealth of emotional stability and secure attachment and healthy relationships.
It's everything.
Yeah.
So today we have a topic that interests me quite a bit. I mean, they all do, but I'm sure I'm going to have some things to share about my own life today. And we are talking about adult children of emotionally immature parents.
Yeah.
So take it away. Like, what does that mean?
So I learned today that emotionally immature parents are frequently referred to as EIPs.
Had no idea.
Yeah. Well, and there's actually a book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. So this is a topic that I think resonates with a lot of people because many of us have experienced difficulties in our adult lives that we've worked through as a result of our relationship with our parents, right? Like, so, whether it's our healthy habits or unhealthy habits, our childhood creates our experience and helps us learn and grow and develop. And so it's not so much about, I want to make this clear, it's not like just blaming the parents for everything. Like, this is not about blame. This is about patterns of behaviors, like from a neutrality perspective. Like, okay, so it's all neutral. It's just this behavior and this response is going to create this experience, which then will create this pattern and this habit, right? So it's not, oh, these parents are jerks or dumb or bad or whatever. They're not. They're just not fully understanding their impact on their child most of the time. I mean, nobody sets out. I shouldn't say nobody. I'm sure like this occurs at like some rare percentile of people where somebody's just trying to hurt their kid, but like most of the time, that's not what's happening, right? Most parents are doing the best they can with what they have. And that's, I think, really important. I talk about moms and I talk about parents and the effect we have on our kids. And, I get some pushback sometimes, like on that, right? Like, well, we can't, the kids have to be responsible or accountable, or you can't just blame your parents for everything. Like, okay, fair. I'm not doing that. It's not about blaming. It's not about that the parents are accountable, because they're not. We are, right? So the child is ultimately accountable when they become an adult. The parent is accountable while the child is a child. And then when the child becomes an adult, they are now accountable for their own experience and to heal their own emotional wounds and unmet needs, so that they don't go and then unleash all of their, pain and fear and, whatever is missing for them. They don't go and unleash that onto the world and the people that they care about, right? So as an adult, it's my responsibility to heal my nervous system, and give myself the capacity to manage my emotions instead of acting out and hurting other people, because no matter how upset I get, it's not okay to hurt other people or animals. It's not okay to damage property, and it's not okay to hurt myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So no matter how upset I get, it's not okay for me to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
That's the adult responsibility part. And I think that's really important. And so when we're talking about like, how did we get here, or why am I like this? It's because we learned it from someone.
Right.
But it's still our responsibility to undo it, to repair that damage. So I think that I want to make that really clear before we get into the discussion about, how maybe we were influenced by our adults in our lives, right?
I can totally relate with that. And I feel like awareness is really important, because you don't know what you don't know. So, when we or you or anybody else out there has these discussions and it becomes aware of, okay, this could have been, possibly contributed to the way I'm feeling and the way I handle things now, like that's not blame, it's awareness.
Yeah, it's just information, right? It's history, it's a thread. It's so that I can know, right? I think when we learn history class in school, we're not learning it to like blame, we're learning it to help ourselves grow from it, right? You won't, because otherwise history often repeats itself. Like these things are true with individual humans as much as they are on like a meta level, right? Like we repeat these patterns. Like these are patterns, these are cycles, these are kind of dances that we get into. And so like, so what's an emotionally mature parent like? So how do I know if I had one, or how do I know if I am one?
Yeah, exactly.
So I know because I am let me just think about it from an emotionally immature behaviors. One, emotionally immature behavior, expecting other people to anticipate your needs and meet them without having to ever ask for what you need.
Giant. That's
okay, so
giant.
Right. So like, well, you didn't do what I was feeling this way on the inside, and you didn't somehow do something that was supposed to make me feel better, even though I didn't ask you to. Right. So like holding other people accountable for our feelings and for not recognizing that we needed help, even though we didn't ask for help. Because as an adult, it's our responsibility to ask for what we need and make that clear, right? I can't just expect the people around me to know, what I'm going through or what I need, unless I explain that to them. And I have to do that in a way that is sometimes vulnerable, which is why we avoid it, because that's hard. So we are passive aggressive. What does it mean to be passive aggressive?
Yes.
Aggressive is passive aggressive is when people are like, if you like okay, I do this sometimes when I'm having a hard day, because we all don't act our best when we're having a hard day. So, say like, oh no, it's totally fine. I don't mind making dinner for everyone every single night, never getting any help. Or do I mind? Right? Like I'm
right.
Congruent. So like that's passive aggressive. What I really need to be saying is like, hey family, I'm having a hard day. Could you help me make dinner tonight? Right? So like I have to be an adult in that situation. I can't just be like, oh no, it's fine. Like I can like I'll just do it. Oh no, I'll take care of it. Right? Like those are passive aggressive things. Or it's passive aggressive to say, like well, I'm sorry you took it that way. What? Like, no, because you can't control so like I'm apologizing for something that I don't have control over. Right? Like that's not a real thing. I need to say like, I am sorry I said a thing in a way that was hurtful to you. Right? Because like, I didn't mean to hurt you, but I did hurt you. So I need to apologize. I can't be like, well, I'm sorry that you took it that way, but like, are you sorry? That doesn't feel sorry to me.
It doesn't.
Right?
It feels like
So
no
they're
responsibility
incongruent.
taken there.
Yeah. So passive aggressive is like saying something that's incongruent with how you're behaving, you know? So we want to not do that. So like, it's important to say what we want, ask for what we need. So like things that are, that's a thing that's immature to do, like emotionally immature. Another emotionally immature thing that I find is to feel or to I mean, a lot of it is about requiring other people to like take care of your feelings, right? Like requiring people to rescue you.
Right.
But
it's their fault if they don't know what to do. It's totally on them.
It's totally right. Like, why can't you like help me, or why aren't you doing anything about this? Like, and so I think anecdotally, you know, we could have conversations like pick this apart, but like globally, what we're talking about here is a lack of accountability for our own experience, our own emotional needs. And so another thing that I was talking about with somebody is sort of the perception that like the assumption or the demand that my bad behavior doesn't affect you in a negative way. Right? So like I can be rude and grumpy and nasty and talk badly to you. I can name call, I can scream and yell, I can slam. And if you get upset, that's not okay, because you need to know that like I'm just having a bad day and it's not about you. Right? So like I would get mad at you for being scared or hurt if I were to be rude and mean to you, because, well, it's not about you. Like, I don't intend to be like that. Well, you're not doing anything about it. You're not being like that. You're not like making any effort to account for your experience and like calm yourself down so that you can treat people the way they deserve to be treated. You don't get to be mad at another person for being hurt by your hurtful actions just because you didn't mean it. So like, that's again, a lack of accountability for my emotional response. Right. So like, I used the example with a friend the other day, like, imagine if I'm holding up this drink over your computer while you work. And I expect you not to be like nervous that it's going to like, why are you afraid it's going to fall? I'm not going to, I would never pour it out. Why would you think I would do that? Right. Probably because you're acting like that. Right. Like, so it's like we expect people to sort of like be overly forgiving. And then when we get approached about this, like when somebody tries to set a boundary, we become upset and offended that the boundary needs to be set because they're not understanding our point of view, right? Like you have no idea what I'm going through. Right. So like, so the reality is, even if I'm going through a lot, that doesn't give me the right to hurt other people, hurt myself, or damage property. So even though I'm going through a lot, it's my responsibility as an adult to stop and say, like, I am going through a lot. I'm really struggling. I need help. I need to reach out to my adult support network, my friends, MOMnation, my therapist, right? Whoever I need to talk to. I mean, the cashier at the grocery store, for God's sake, who cares? Anybody, talk to somebody, like get adults to help you with your adult problems. So that's an adult's responsibility. Now, when we're emotionally immature, we expect other people to take on that burden for us, right? Because we are not accountable for our own internal experience. And so we don't accept that our bad behavior can harm another person. And so because if our bad behavior harms another person, well, that makes us upset. And we can't be upset because we don't know how to handle upset feelings. And so we deny that that's happening. So that's when we gaslight somebody. Oh, well, that's not what happened. Well, I didn't do that. I didn't hurt you. I didn't yell at you. I didn't do, right? Like, so it's like, we're gaslighting now, right? Because we have to deny the experience that somebody else had as a result of our behavior. Because if we know that our behavior hurt another person, then we know that we need to start being accountable for our behavior. But that scares us because we don't feel safe and we don't feel connected to ourselves enough, right? As an adult, we don't feel capable. We feel out of control and inferior. So we're basically like expecting everybody else to sort of like take the emotional brunt of our experience and just love us anyway, like be okay with that. Like not only love us, but like rescue us, nurture us, and never hold us accountable. Never set a boundary. Never be hurt or upset by us. So that's an emotional immaturity. I, as an adult, can recognize that like something that I do, something that I do, Katie, could hurt your feelings. That wouldn't be my intent. But that doesn't make it impossible to have happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Intent is not relevant in your experience of the interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So I can say, oh my gosh, because what I would think is, I really am so sorry that happened because I want you to feel connected and safe in our friendship. And so I truly apologize for the thing that I did that hurt you, whatever that was. I don't, if this were a real thing, I would know what it is and I would make that clear. Mm-hmm. But I would account for that and I'd be like, man, I'm really sorry. And so I would be mindful of, if it was the language that I used, if it was the reference or something, right? Whatever it was that hurt you, I would be mindful of that and be like, oh, I that's not I don't want to do that again. So I'm going to work hard not to do that again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and then in your example too, about the person who is kind of acting out, is having a bad day, and then gets upset that the other person also expresses emotion. So they're not allowing other people to be human, but they want all of the, what am I trying to say? Like they want the grace from others to be allowed to be human.
Right. Because they're the only, so this is a narcissistic tendency. So emotional immaturity. And I like to be, I really want to be careful with the narcissistic.
Agreed.
I know this is a thing. So I want to tell you what I think about narcissistic behavior. It's a response to trauma. It's a coping mechanism. It is a defense against feeling vulnerable. It does not make a person evil, intentionally harmful, bad, mean, nothing. I want zero negative assignments to the human who is exhibiting narcissistic behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like, let's start there. This is a human who exhibits narcissistic behavior because narcissistic behavior is a defense against feeling vulnerable.
Makes sense.
So in this context, like you said, everybody else has to give me all this grace because I'm going through a lot. That's like saying I'm more important than everybody else. But at the same time, ironically, you're actually more saying that you don't exist at all, like that your presence isn't important because it can't hurt anybody. Therefore, nobody really cares about me. Right? So the underlying context of you can't be hurt by me is, well, I don't matter enough to hurt anyone. And I don't matter enough to change, right? Like helping myself or getting better isn't worth my efforts because nobody cares about me anyway. Like, right? So it's this cycle.
Really interesting.
Kind of two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting.
So like we talk about narcissistic behavior as if like, oh, a narcissist is somehow this like evil person. No, they're not. They're a hurt person trying to protect themselves from their hurt self. And they don't feel comfortable enough to change because they don't feel like they're loved enough to do the work because the work is hard and vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And that's a fear. They don't have the sense of they're afraid. Now, can people do bad things and hurt other people in meaningful ways that need to be accounted for? Absolutely. Sorry, yep. I swore.
No, fine. That's passion right there.
These are not excuses for bad behavior. This doesn't mean, oh, well, this person doesn't need to be accountable or we shouldn't they don't have to experience the consequences of their actions. Because yes, they do. Yes, they do. The only thing I'm sort of trying to change from our perspective is that these people are somehow bad or evil or like unrescuable or unsalvageable. They're like not, because that's just not true. Like hurt people. Mm-hmm. And when we are feeling hurt, afraid, ashamed, we exhibit behaviors that tend to be harmful to others and tend to harm our relationships with others. And so a natural consequence of that at times, and this is one of the things that we could get into with our parents, is if we have a parent who is emotionally immature and constantly hurting us, then we have the right to change our relationship dynamic. Mm-hmm. And so that's a natural consequence of being a harmful person, right? So unhealthy people tend to have unhealthy relationships and tend to harm other people. Mm-hmm. So when you're in relationship with an unhealthy person, it's really important that you choose your boundaries and like recognize that relationship and set those very clearly. And so a consequence might be that that person doesn't get invited to certain events. That person isn't going to be included in certain things because they're hurting other people. And so that's a natural consequence. That's not a punishment. That's just it's not okay for you to come over to my house and like criticize every single thing in the house. Like, what if I invited you over for dinner and you were like, ugh, these drapes,
right?
Like, what were you thinking here? Like, why did you make it that way? That's objectively rude.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care who you are. That's rude. You don't get to do that. I probably wouldn't invite you over again. And if I wanted to maintain the relationship, which I do, I would say, okay, well, I'm going to hang out with you outside of my home. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that's a natural thing that I would do. Like, oh, she's very critical and that makes me feel upset. And I don't want to be upset, but I want to hang out. So like, let's go out. Right? Does that make sense? Like we're saving the relationship by setting the boundaries. We're not damaging it.
What's an appropriate boundary to set? And I'm sure this is so case by case. It's probably really hard. But if you have a relationship with a parent that is emotionally immature and they are excessively critical, or they do and say things that do hurt you, or maybe they do and say things about other members of your family that hurt you, what's a good boundary there? Hey, don't want to get into that. Or, okay, you're going down a road that I'm not comfortable with. Like, what do you say there? And how do you stop it?
I think both of those sentences that you used are good. Another thing is to like have those conversations privately and intentionally, right? Like not as much in the moment, because if someone corrects me in the moment, I might get ashamed. Mm-hmm. And then when I'm ashamed, I act out, right? So then I can be defensive. So instead we want to have these conversations like separately, like, hey, I'm going to be honest. I really want you to come to, my son's birthday party. And I also know that, my in-laws are going to be there. And, I know that there's been things that you've mentioned about them that you don't like, and I'm really concerned. I want to make sure that everybody can feel welcome and safe in my home. And so I'm going to ask that everyone is, respectful of each other, right? Like, and that we don't make comments about any other person or any other, anybody's ideas or anybody's experience. Like we need to not do that. And if like, that's just not something that I'm going to allow in my home. Mm-hmm. Right. So like, that's a hard conversation. And then a lot of the time people get upset, but people don't like to hear this stuff. So like, you're not going to get a great reaction. That's okay. Mm-hmm. That's the important part, is when you set a boundary, the other person doesn't necessarily have to like it.
And they usually don't, right? I mean, I suppose I take that back. I suppose that if they are healthy or a healthy person, then they understand you setting a boundary, depending on what it is, right? Because depending on why you need to set the boundary, are they really healthy or not? If they're an understanding person, a more mature person, they're going to get, that you're doing that. And I don't think it's you, but somebody had said, and it always stuck with me, is the person that gets the most upset about the boundaries that you set is the one that benefited the most from them, or from not having them, excuse me.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? I'm like, did I remember that right?
That wasn't me, but that makes sense. I'm tracking with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you set a boundary and somebody has a negative emotional outburst or treats you negatively, then that's probably something to look at.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a thing that happens, especially when we're talking about emotionally immature people.
Mm-hmm.
So when we set a boundary with somebody and we say like, hey, I can't have you come over if you're going to, make comments about my spouse's job,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that you don't like that they work at the grocery store,
Mm-hmm.
or that they work at, the car place because you drive a different kind of car or whatever. It doesn't literally could be anything like,
Right.
but I'm not going to have you make, like, that's not okay to do. Right. So the end. And then they're going to be like, well, I don't, da, 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 da. Okay. Like, I understand that you feel a different way about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say like, and that's okay. Like you don't have to, agree with the fact that it's harmful or hurtful. Cause like a lot of people are like, well, I'm just kidding. Okay. Well, don't.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask that you don't. We don't make jokes about that. That's going to be a rule in my house. And like, if they're like upset or defensive about that, it's like, it's okay for you to be upset. Like, I understand that this might be hard to hear because, maybe you didn't realize that it was hurtful for us. And I know that you didn't want to hurt us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's not okay for me to just be hurt in secret just to keep you from feeling hurt by this conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because then you're saying, I want you to be hurt so that I'm not hurt. That's the implication.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody blows up at you because you bring up something that's hurtful that they're doing, what they're saying is, no, you need to be hurt in secret. And you can't tell me that those things are hurtful because I don't like the way it feels. And my feelings are more important. My comfort is more important than your comfort. And that's not okay. Like, that's just objectively wrong. So, like, yes, I understand that this is hard to hear, and you're an adult and you can work through these feelings. Like, that's okay. It's okay for you to get upset.
Mm-hmm.
I don't expect you to like agree with everything I say. However, I am asking you to respect this boundary in my home.
Mm-hmm. It feels like everything boils down to communication, effective communication.
Yeah, we have to say what we mean, address the actual problem. Because a lot of times it's about we like make it about something else.
Right.
It's not about that. So like, the communication is key, and unhealthy people, emotionally unhealthy or emotionally immature people, have a hard time communicating effectively, right? Because that's a thing we learn with maturity.
Mm-hmm. Just many life examples that I've lived kind of run through my head, but one in particular that I want to share is kind of like an example of what a child may have dealt with having emotionally immature caregivers. So one, I'll never forget this. There's lots of things I'll never forget, but I used to play field hockey when I was in high school, and I was really into it. So much so that I would play field, like we'd have practice, we'd have games, but then I would play field hockey every other minute my eyes were open that I could. So I was very, very into it. And my caretakers and their spouses would often come to my games, which was really great. Like, I felt super supported, right? It was awesome. And this one particular home game that we were having, I was fortunate enough to have a few of them there. And I remember when you're when your head's in the game and you're on the field, like you don't necessarily see everything that's going on in the stands, right? You don't see everything that's going on in the audience and whatever. And so when I get off the field, I usually only have a few minutes to get a drink of water, do what I need to do before I'm probably going to get sent back in, right?
Yeah.
And so I had come off the field and I saw the spouse of one of my caretakers with a hand reached out with a big Gatorade. And I was like, sweet, I could totally use a Gatorade right now. That is like so awesome. Thank you so much. That was really cool. And so I ran up to that person and, great big hug, took the Gatorade, went back to my spot in the field, like waiting to get thrown back in or asked to go back in, I should say.
Sure.
And so after the game was over, my other caretaker was there, had arrived at some point. I don't even know because I didn't see this person. I didn't see them. And I got off the field and hopped in the car, and I didn't get spoken to for 3 days for not seeing my actual caretaker first and for going to the spouse of the other one, because big shiny red Gatorade that's what I saw.
Right.
And I remember feeling like, what the heck happened? I have no idea what I did. Like, did I play that? Are you embarrassed? Am I a shitty kid? And all these things ran through my head until the spouse of that caregiver, notice I'm being very careful, okay? I don't want to call anybody out. The spouse of that caregiver eventually pulled me aside and was like, hey, this is the deal. And this is the reason why you're basically being not spoken to. And it's been days. And I was like 12, I don't know, how old, freshman.
Yeah.
So maybe a little older, 13, 14.
Like 14, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really good example of requiring other people, especially kids, to be responsible for your emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not being accountable to work through those emotions and be able to communicate effectively. And in that case, like, I'm glad you brought up a kid situation, because we've been talking about examples for like adults, right?
Right.
It's never your job as a child to take your caretakers.
Right.
It's never your job to regulate an adult's emotions. It's never your job to make an adult feel loved. It's never your job to make an adult feel good enough. It's never your job to make an adult feel anything. Because adults need to be responsible for their own emotions.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah.
And me putting myself in the shoes of that person, I'm thinking, oh man, I would feel grateful that the spouse of the other parent came to the table and came to the game to support my child and brought her something. And like, that's really cool. And, my kid needs support. Her parents are divorced, and it's like weird for her, that's what I would think.
Yeah. And I also think to that extent, so like emotional immaturity comes out, especially when there's exes involved.
Yes.
Right? Because like every single adult will go into some emotional immaturity when thinking about like a past relationship or a breakup or something like that, right? Like those are hard. That's just hard. So it's extra hard for parents who are broken up to maintain the level of maturity that is required in order to nurture and support your child in having a healthy relationship with the other parent. So I've been talking about this a lot lately, as I'm developing a co-parenting course.
Oh, nice.
That I want to be able to kind of offer. And one of those big things that we're talking about is that every single child deserves a healthy relationship with both parents. That means that the child deserves to be able to give and receive love to both parents and be supported in that, right? So for example, if one of my children, because I'm a divorced person, I have an ex, I have kids, and that's not always been easy or fun.
Right.
My experience with my divorce has not been without its complications or conflict, right? So it certainly brought the worst out in me. And I can definitely remember when my kids were little, 1,000 times over, when I felt like triggered and just like furious about the other person doing something or whatever, right? Like 1,000 times I've had that feeling. Now, what's important to do your best at doing is not make the child accountable for that. Right. So for example, if my kids come home and they're like, oh my gosh, you know, we did this, and it was so fun. And like, da, 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 da. It's not okay for me to be like, well, why didn't you do your homework? Why didn't they make you do your homework? That's their responsibility. Like they should have done that. They should have made you eat healthy. They shouldn't have let you do that. Like, because my parents now I'm like in trouble for having a good time. I don't know what's going on. Like, so now the child believes that their relationship with the other parent is a threat to their relationship with the other parent. So by me having a healthy relationship with one parent, that threatens my relationship with the other. And that's really complicated. That's neurobiologically so complicated that it's impossible to reconcile in a child. It's literally impossible. That cannot be reconciled. I want to make that clear. That cannot be reconciled. Having one relationship with one parent threatening a relationship with the other parent is like deadly in a way that will totally fracture a child's psyche and sense of self, and will absolutely lead to dissociative processes, depression, possibly self-harm behaviors, possibly suicidal ideation. Because attachment, we've talked about this 1,000 times, is the primary survival need for all children. And they must have an attachment with their parents or their caregivers. And so when you have known to have both, even if you've not known the other, the drive to attach is still there. It cannot be removed, not in a healthy and safe way. To what happens though, when we sever that and require that there not be attachment, then what we get is an unhealthy, what's called a defense against attachment. And that is basically where we internally have to suppress our need for survival in order to survive, which is so conflicting that it creates a whole variety of developmental trauma symptoms and other things like leading into adulthood. But most notably, it will create rage, because now I have to disconnect. You want to talk about, like, people want to bring up things like, you know, sociopathy or, you know, lack of empathy, all of that stuff. Sever the relationship with the child's other parent. And they have to disconnect. They have to. It's a survival need. And so that's when we get, well, I can't attach. It's not safe. So now I don't care about anybody. Now I hate everybody. Now I'm on my own. Now I have to protect myself against the world. I can't be vulnerable. I can't connect. Like, it's not safe to connect. And so I'm going to then have a really unhealthy relationship with myself and with the world. And I'm probably going to act out in a violent way. I will probably demonstrate violence in my life.
I remember feeling like that, Laura. That happened to me. Did I demonstrate violence? Maybe in some ways, but I definitely felt that, okay, I'm on my own then. And estranged myself from both of them. for a considerable amount of time.
Right.
And I don't know that either one of them was really going for that. You know what I mean? But that's what ended up happening.
Right. And that wasn't fair.
No, not at all. But that, what you just said hit home so much. I remember I wouldn't tell one of them about what we did at the other one's house. I just wouldn't tell. And so what happens there? Now you're cutting that line of communication with your kid. Pretty sure they didn't want that.
Secrets, shame,
Mhm.
insecurity, fear,
Yeah.
and that leads to rage. And so
Yeah.
in young boys, often we see violence. In young girls, we often see seeking connection elsewhere.
And I will share that, I'm not going to sit here and say that there were, tens of thousands of people in my life by any means, but I was very quick to jump into a relationship because I felt like I constantly needed to be in one.
Mhm.
And and this is, teenage, early 20s, I would leave get out of a relationship for whatever reason. And I was a kid, so it's not like they were hardcore. And then I would like no lag, you know what I mean? Oh, this one's my boyfriend now. And so I just felt like I needed to be connected to somebody when I look back at it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's leads to just a really unhealthy relationship with ourselves and so much internal conflict and self-loathing and like self-hatred and self-harm, right? So those harmful behaviors, those self-destructive behaviors that we engage in when we're feeling the way that we feel when somebody doesn't care for us properly as a kid. So it's a fear, shame, rage cycle, right? I'm ashamed, I'm afraid, and I don't have any other, I have to, like, the rage is a response to that. I can't need someone. It's not safe to need someone, but I need someone.
Right.
And so the parents in this situation or caregivers in this situation, when we are driving what we think is just facts sometimes, because sometimes the other parent truly is the worst.
Yeah. Sometimes it's true.
I'm not debating that it's not true. Like, that's fine. It's
Right.
just not healthy for the kid to be put in the middle of that. Like, that's all that there is to it. It's not okay for the parents to reject the child because of their relationship with the other parent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is what's not okay. And it's mandatory that the child has a healthy relationship with both parents, or at least attempts that, because that is literally our biological need. So the child, that will be happening internally no matter what. So to reject that is to cut off an innate, inherent need and create this unmet need in the child that is going to then turn into a whole bunch of other stuff later.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, so that's a really huge thing. And when we're kids and our parents are emotionally immature, even if they're together, right? Perhaps they're arguing with each other, or like putting the kid in the middle, saying like, well, the only thing, like, well, you're causing problems in my relationship because you are, because, you're being so difficult, and like, I'm so upset, or, the other parent is mad at me for the way that I handle it. Like, just making it about the kid, like, it's just too big for the kid. Like, it's not okay for kids to think that they're responsible for their parents' emotions.
Right. Or even involved in those interactions.
Right. At any level.
I had another caretaker, not a parent, but somebody that I spent a lot of time with, and they would constantly fight with their spouse. And I was like, I don't know, probably 9 or 10, something like that. And then I'd get dragged into it. Well, didn't he say that, Katie?
Oh, Ugh, nightmare.
I talk about freezing. Like, you don't know what to say.
Right.
That was
You
so
can't.
hard. It
That's the
happened to me
worst.
a lot.
Yeah, like that's not okay. That's an emotional immaturity that is then going to pass down to the kid. Like, and adult children who are now, like, as adults, if we had those experiences, right, like they impact us in a variety of ways. But what's important to know also is that that adult is also can be likely to replay those things with their kids. So it's important to know objectively, like, that we can't expect our kids to manage our emotions. So we say, so this comes up a lot, and it's not necessarily a sign of immaturity globally, but like it is a thing that we need to be aware of, is that like it's not okay for us to put that on our kids, is to like to say like, oh well, you know, don't say, like, when kids are self-harming or suicidal, and they say that to their parents and say like, I'm hurting myself, or I want to hurt myself, or I want to, a lot of the time the gut instinct reaction is to say to the kid, oh, that hurts me. When you hurt yourself, that hurts me.
Mm-hmm.
So logically, I can make the connection to why you think that's helpful to say. But it's not at all helpful to say, because then it just makes the kid feel even more shame.
Yeah, it makes
even
it
more
worse.
disconnection, even more, because it's about that shame and disconnection. So we want to foster connection. We need to say, I am so sorry that you're experiencing this. I've got you.
Mm-hmm.
You're not alone. I love you all the time, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what your behavior is. Right. And I'm so glad you told me that was brave. That must have been hard. And I want you to know I'm here for you. And so when a kid comes to you with a problem, so parents that are emotionally immature will make that about them.
Right.
Right. And say, well, that hurts me that you would say that. Okay. I'm literally telling you that I might die by my own hand. I'm a child, and that hurts you. Like, that's the concern that we're talking about right now. Right. So they make it about them. So they might say something like, you know, you like so this is a common expression, is like, well, I didn't raise you that way. Okay. You like, it's not about you. It's not about how you raise them. It's not about you as the parent. It's about the kid in this experience. Right. So we want to separate, we have to separate ourselves and our own emotional needs to have the outcome of raising the child be a certain thing, right? Because there's no return on this investment, guys. Sorry. But that's not a guarantee. Our kids are allowed to hate us. They're allowed to leave us. They're allowed to not want to spend time with us later. Like, we don't get a guaranteed return on this. I know that we want one. Like, I get that, right? Like, this is hard. It is hard to let our kids be, but we have to let them be themselves, and we can't make them into what we want them to be or expect them to be that. That is a sign of emotional immaturity. That is a sign of, like, if it's more about you than it is about what's going on with them, right? Then you've got to get out of your own self. And that's a thing that we then will carry on into our kids' lives, right? So like, I'm guilty of that. And we talked about this on the episode about mom guilt. I don't know, like, basically that when we're in those feelings about ourselves, we're really projecting onto the kid that, like, it's really more about us. Like, we're kind of saying, like, I need my kid to be okay in order to, like, regulate my own emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that my kid isn't allowed to really learn and, like, experience life in an authentic way, because they need to pretend to be fine all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when we have parents who are so reactive and just, like, a lot of emotional turmoil all the time, the kids sort of put on this face of, like, I'm fine. I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. Like, I can't tell anybody anything because, like, my mom's going to freak out.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So like, those are kinds of things that we need to be like mindful of in our heads. It's like, is my emotional reaction to this conversation probably going to make this a less likely thing to happen next time? Like, am I inviting? Am I supportive? Am I fostering connection, or am I creating distance and disconnection?
Right. Because now you're basically forcing your child to disconnect from their own feelings.
That's right. Because their feelings hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
So your child is essentially living their life to protect you from their hurt feelings, which is then what you're going to end up doing in your relationship later, right? Is you're going to have a relationship where somebody can't, and then we start back at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And
where
it's
we're
just in a
trying to
mirror.
talk. Exactly. So where we're trying to talk to an adult, but our feelings aren't able to be like, but we can't know that we've hurt another person. So it's like that whole cycle again, where we've never learned how to effectively communicate and experience difficult feelings. And because we've never learned how to do that, one, we don't know how to let other people to work with others, but like, we can't let other people work with us either. It's sort of a lose-lose.
Mm-hmm. This is a deep one. I feel like we need a part 2.
I want a part 2. I was like, we're going to need to talk more about this.
We are going to need to talk more about this because my next question, I can't even ask it because we're kind of out of time. But my next one, I feel like, is a big, long conversation, and it's, how do we break this cycle? So, right, big, long conversation. And I feel like, and you tell me, but I feel like I've been in a bunch of therapy sessions. How do you unpack that? And how, as a therapist, do you figure that out, that that's what's going on with your client or your patient, I should say?
That's an interesting question. So for me, the foundation of all of my work kind of comes through this lens of like, what unmet need is underneath this behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I always know that that's what's happening because that's always what's happening.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's just what's happening. Like, it's just, that is what's happening. I guarantee it. So like, I guess my answer to that is, what unmet need are you trying to fill or meet with whatever is going on? And I was just talking to a friend of mine about this because she works with couples and does emotionally focused therapy. And so we were sort of talking about how that's couples and individuals and like how it's all connected. And so, my question is always, well, what's helpful about this strategy? Why am I reacting like this? Like, why am I not willing to hear what my child is saying to me?
Mm-hmm.
Because it hurts me. What does that mean about, right? Like, what does it say about me? What's helpful about me blocking this information? I'm trying to protect myself in some way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, that's kind of always what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what the problem is. And so when it comes to stopping the cycle, and I'll just like, this is my answer to everything. The first step is to check in with yourself and make the decision to put your child's emotional needs in front of yours, and know that that's going to be really, really hard, and set aside some time to let that process start to happen, right? So like, recognize that you are not going to still have the capacity for the same amount of things in your life. Like, if you're in this cycle, you will not have the capacity for the same amount of things in your life and be able to move as quickly as you move today while you're addressing this problem.
Right.
Because it's not easy. It's going to take change. That'd be like, so I'm right-handed. It's like, I'm asking you now to write with your left hand perfectly every time and never instinctually reach with your right.
Mm-hmm.
That's unreasonable.
Yeah.
Of course, you're going to reach with your right hand first. So we're always going to instinct go for that response that we are going to go to. And then we stop and say, oh, right, I'm doing it differently now. So, okay, let me back up. Let me reset. And then I'm going to do it differently. So that takes longer. So we need to budget in the time, what I call emotional overhead. We always account for financial, like for cost and hours.
Right.
We need to account for the emotional overhead that's going to go into making this change. And we need to allow that in our lives. We need to rebudget our time. So that might mean we need to wake up 15 minutes earlier if morning is a hard thing.
Mm-hmm.
That might mean we have to say no to some things in order to make more space and time to connect and engage. Like, this is a full-blown lifestyle shift.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's really the first realization that we need to make.
And then, obviously, as we know, that muscle gets stronger, that mapping in the brain gets deeper, and then you're going to start reaching for the left instead of reaching for the right eventually.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It starts, but you have to have the right, you have to expect that it is not going to just be a thing that you automatically do now that you've heard this podcast and like, right? Because we know, and then we have to change. It's a process, and that's okay. Like, we need to not blame ourselves. We need to recognize that this is okay and that we're doing our best and we're going to make our changes and we're going to apologize when we mess it up and we're going to keep going forward. We're going to focus on connection from here on, safety and connection every time from this moment forward, and learn how to regulate your own nervous system. I have a free course on that on my website, by the way.
Do you? Well, shoot it over to me. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's totally free. It's a little class and it comes with little handouts. And you can learn how to emotionally regulate yourself before you then interact with other people.
I like it. I like it a lot. All right. I hate to do this because I know we have more. We have so much more.
Yeah, we're going to do a part 2.
We need to do a part 2. Thank you so much for being with me again this month, like you are always every month. And we are coming up on 2 years. It's so crazy.
So cool.
I know. And we had a couple of comments come through. Want to thank Ashley Parker for her comments. So when we get off, you can read through them too. But I do want to mention one thing that she said, and it's, I cannot thank you both enough for having these episodes. This truly is like free therapy sessions. And that speaks to my heart because I know you and I are both on the same page. That is really that's our goal. And
that's literally what we want to do.
Literally what we want to do. So
yes.
I am so happy. Thank you, Ashley, for being with us. Thank you, Laura. If you guys want to check out any of our previous episodes, like I mentioned, we've got quite a bit under our belt now. Hop on over to our YouTube channel. It is at MOMnation USA. That's our handle. If you are more of the podcast type, you prefer to listen, maybe while you work out or drive or cook. I don't, but you do. Then hop on over to your favorite podcast platform. Do a quick search for MOMnation Talk Radio, and there you will find us. Please download, like, subscribe, all the things, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.